In 1942, a Sumerian tablet was pulled from a storage drawer at Yale University. It had been cataloged, given a number, and forgotten. The number was YBC 4621. For more than 3,000 years, it had lain in the ground beneath the ruined city of Nippur in southern Iraq. For another quarter century after its excavation, it had lain in a drawer in New Haven, Connecticut, unread. When the Sumerologist Samuel Noah Kramer finally translated it, what he found rewrote what we know about resurrection. A god is dragged screaming to the underworld by demons who know no food and drink no water. A goddess descends through 7 gates and is hung on a hook on the wall. A fly betrays the hiding place of a shepherd. And a divine decree, written in clay 4,000 years ago, splits the year in two, half above the earth, half below. The shepherd's name was Dumuzi, and his story was already 2,000 years old when the prophet Ezekiel wrote down that the women of Jerusalem were weeping for him at the north gate of the temple. Now let me show you what the tablets actually say. Subscribe to Origin Codex if you want the original texts read aloud. The source books the establishment doesn't quote in church. The tablet sits today at the Yale Babylonian Collection. Catalog number YBC 4621. 94 lines of cuneiform, baked clay, from the city of Nippur, dated to the Old Babylonian period roughly 4,000 years ago. It is one of dozens of manuscripts that together form the composition we now call Inanna's Descent to the Netherworld. The full composite text runs to over 410 lines. It is the longest surviving Sumerian narrative we have. The principal join is a tablet excavated at Nippur and catalogued in 1889 at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, registered as CBS 9800, the lower half of a 4-column tablet. The British Assyriologist Stephen Langdon published the surviving fragment in 1914. Then, in 1942, Kramer connected the Yale fragment to the Penn fragment, and the second half of the story came into view for the first time in nearly 4 millennia. Buried in the soil of Iraq for 3,700 years, then buried in the storage drawers of 2 American museums for another half-century. When it was finally read, scholars realized the story they had been telling was upside down. For decades, the Sumerian gods were understood through a single Akkadian recension, a shorter copy of the myth from the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, dated to the 7th century before Christ. That tablet told scholars that the goddess Ishtar descended to the underworld to rescue her lover, Tammuz. The Scottish anthropologist James Fraser built an entire universal theory on it. The Golden Bough, published from 1911 to 1915, declared that every ancient civilization once worshipped a dying and rising god, a vegetation deity, killed in the autumn, resurrected in the spring. Dumuzi, Osiris, Adonis, Baal, Attis, all stamped from the same template. When the Sumerian tablets came up out of the soil of Nippur and the picture changed. The wife did not descend to save the husband. She descended for reasons of her own. And when she could not climb back out, the demons of the underworld followed her up to the surface looking for a substitute body. The husband was the substitute. The opening line of Inanna's Descent is one of the most quoted in all of Sumerian literature. From the great heaven, she set her mind on the great below. From the great heaven, the goddess set her mind on the great below. Inanna, the queen of heaven, descends through 7 gates. At each gate she is stripped of 1 garment, 1 ornament, 1 symbol of power. By the time she reaches the throne room of her sister Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, she is naked. The 7 judges of the underworld, the Anuna, render their verdict against her. Inanna becomes a corpse. The tablet says she is hung on a hook on the wall. Her Sukal, her loyal minister Ninshubur, waits 3 days and 3 nights. When her mistress does not return, Ninshubur appeals to the gods. The great Enlil refuses. The moon god Nana refuses. Finally, Enki, the god of wisdom in Eridu, fashions 2 beings from the dirt under his fingernails. They carry the food of life and the water of life down through the 7 gates. They sprinkle Inanna 60 times with the water of life. She is revived. But the Anuna stop her at the gate. They quote the law of the dead. The line is preserved exactly. Who has ever ascended from the underworld unscathed? If Inanna is to ascend, let her provide a substitute for herself. The Gala follow her up. The tablet describes them in chilling procedural detail. They know no food, know no drink, eat no flour offering, drink no libation. They never enjoy the marital embrace. They never have any sweet children to kiss. They snatch the son from a man's knee. They carry off the bride from her marriage home. Inanna passes through her cities. At Umma, she finds her son Shara in mourning. At Bad Tabira, she finds Lulal in mourning. She spares them. Then she reaches the great apple tree in the plain of Kulaba, near the holy city of Uruk. And there is her husband Dumuzi, dressed in a magnificent garment, seated magnificently on a throne. He is not mourning. The tablet says, "She looked at him. It was the look of death. She spoke to him. It was the speech of anger. She shouted at him. It was the shout of heavy guilt. How much longer? Take him away." The Gala seize the shepherd by the thighs. They pour the milk from his churns. They drag him down. For 70 years after Penn dug the first tablet out of Nippur, scholars assumed that was where the story ended. Then came the joins. New excavation fragments from Ur at the British Museum. A previously untouched tablet acquired by the Schoyen collection in Oslo. A new fragment from Susa, edited by the Danish Sumerologist Bent Alster of the University of Copenhagen in 1975, then expanded again in 2006. Each new fragment added lines to the closing section of the story. And in 2023, a team at Tel Aviv University and Ariel University, led by Dr. Shai Gordine of the Department of Land of Israel Studies, published a neural machine translation system for Akkadian cuneiform. They called it Academia. The paper appeared in PNAS Nexus in May of that year. Their model can now read tablets that human Assyriologists have not yet touched. The British Museum, according to its own keeper of cuneiform, Dr. Irving Finkel, holds over 130,000 tablets, the majority of them still untranslated. The original texts are still being read aloud, for the first time, in real time. The story did not stay in Sumer. The same god, under different names, walked westward across the ancient Near East for 3,000 years. In Ugarit, he is Baal, struck down by Mot, the god of death, lamented for a season before his return. In Egypt, he is Osiris, murdered and dismembered into 14 pieces, reassembled by Isis, made the king of the dead. In Phoenicia, he is Adonis, gored by a wild boar, mourned by Aphrodite. The river at Byblos, the modern Nar Ibrahim, runs red every spring with iron sediment that the ancients believed was his blood. The Greek satirist Lucian, writing in the 2nd century after Christ, says the women of Byblos shaved their heads each year and wept for him. And in Jerusalem, around 592 before Christ, the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel writes one of the strangest passages in the Bible. "Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord. And behold, women were sitting there, weeping for Tammuz." Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 14. The same God, by his Akkadian name, inside the temple in Jerusalem, 2,000 years after the Sumerian tablets were written. The church fathers Origen and Jerome both identified this Tammuz as Adonis, the Sumerian shepherd by another name. The 4th month of the modern Hebrew calendar is still called Tammuz. Dr. Helena Ostrov, an Assyriologist at Stockholm University's Department of Linguistics and Philology, was preparing in 2017 to publish a new commentary on the closing section of Inanna's descent. She drew on what she described in a single Swedish public radio interview as 4 previously uncatalogued Nippur fragments held in a restricted basement collection at one of the major European museums. In that interview, she said the surviving Dumuzi tablets contain ritual procedures that, in her own words, modern theology is not prepared to read aloud. She retired the following year. The commentary was never published. Her successor, when contacted by other scholars, said the project had been transferred to a different department. The fragments have not been seen since. Now let me address the controversial part. The wild claim is that the Sumerians invented the resurrection narrative, and that everything that came after, the Greek mystery cults, the Egyptian afterlife, the Christian gospel, is downstream of one shepherd god in a clay tablet. Almost certainly not in a direct genealogical sense. The University of Chicago religious historian Jonathan Z. Smith spent his career dismantling that idea. There is no textual chain, no manuscript of transmission, no preacher carrying the Sumerian original into a Galilean synagogue. But that does not mean the account is fiction. In 2001, the Swedish Assyriologist Tryggve Mettinger of Lund University published The Riddle of Resurrection. After 3 decades of working through every primary text in every Semitic language available, he concluded the following. Dumuzi, Baal, and Melkart were dying and rising gods already in pre-Christian times. The pattern existed. The Sumerians wrote it down first. The point is not that the Bible copied a Sumerian myth. The point is this. For 3,000 years before the Gospels were written, the ancient world already knew the story of a god who died and came back. The Sumerians did not invent that story. They were just the first to carve it in clay, where we can still read it. The half-year decree is the line that haunts modern readers. Inanna speaks at the closing of the tablet. You for half the year, and your sister for half the year. When you are demanded, on that day you will stay. When your sister is demanded, on that day you will be released. The 4th month of the Hebrew calendar is called Tammuz to this day. The 17th of Tammuz is a fast day in Jewish tradition. The original ritual function of that fast, according to Mettinger and other scholars, was the lamentation of a dying shepherd god, preserved in the calendar long after the god himself was forgotten by name. 5,000 years after the first cult began, the lament still has a date on the calendar. The tablet sits today in the Yale Babylonian collection, catalog number YBC 4621. You can request to see it if you visit. Most people don't. The book was never lost, it was just never read aloud. Whether you call him Dumuzi, Tammuz, Adonis, Baal, or by no name at all, the tablet still names him. If you want more breakdowns of the original texts the establishment doesn't translate, subscribe now. Next week I am covering the 7 gates of the underworld, and exactly what Inanna was stripped of at each one. The video on screen breaks down the goddess herself, the Queen of Heaven who made the journey first. Click it.